All right, so we're done with single-celled organisms now. We're still going to occasionally talk about cells and cellular processes like osmosis and diffusion and stuff like that because they are used on a large scale by multicellular organisms. Okay, that's going to be our focus from here on out. How do our multicellular organisms use cellular transport principles, cellular metabolism kind of stuff, okay, in order to support themselves? All right, the organisms we'll be looking at are specifically plants. So the key points for today: understand how transport within cells is similar and obviously still involved in transport in a multicellular organism. Okay, so like I said, that means diffusion, okay, osmosis mostly, okay, and a little bit of active, but not much. Okay, those are our three cellular transport processes, right, that will be in there. Okay, but again, this one's the big, okay, that one's also big. Second key point, understand how nutrients, that is, the key things a plant requires to survive, water, sugar, and minerals, are transported in what we call vascular plants. Okay, plants can be grouped into two very large, very broad categories: vascular and non-vascular. A moss is an example of a non-vascular plant. It doesn't have any tubes, okay, that help it to transport water, which is why you never see a 6-foot tall moss. Okay, they would simply be unable to transport water to that kind of a height without the tubes. Okay, they also typically don't have waxy cuticles. Okay, things like that. That's why they dry out so quickly. Okay, vascular plants are basically every kind of plant you can imagine other than that. Okay, a dandelion is a vascular plant, a spruce tree is a vascular plant, grass is a vascular plant. Right, basically anything that we would normally look at are vascular. Okay, we're going to learn the structure of vascular plants. So we'll look basic stuff, roots, stem, and leaves, but we'll also look at the parts of each. Okay, especially the leaf. We looked at that diagram the other day when we talked about multicellularity. We'll be looking at that leaf diagram again, the palisade layer, spongy layer, and all that. Okay, and then lastly, learn what forces are involved in transport. So again, that's going to come back to this, osmosis and diffusion, and some of the forces that plants use to help those processes along. Okay, questions on that stuff? So, the resources that a land or a terrestrial plant needs to survive are not in the same place. That's what spatially separated means. Okay? What are the things a plant needs? Water is one. Sunlight. CO2. All right, got to have those things. Minerals probably also in there, okay, but the big three, water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide, that's how they make sugar. Those are the starting materials, okay, for photosynthesis. Obviously, sunlight's not a material, it's the source of energy, okay, but we got to have water and carbon dioxide in order for photosynthesis to occur, okay? Now, unfortunately, carbon dioxide is available up here. Water is available down here, okay? They are spatially separated. The plant has to be able to transport water to the leaves so that it can support the process of photosynthesis. The plant also needs to be able to transport the stuff produced in photosynthesis, sugar, down to the roots that can't carry out photosynthesis themselves. Okay? Why can't roots carry out photosynthesis? They don't have any sun. Last time I checked, roots are underground and it's dark under there. Okay, so obviously the roots are not a photosynthetic organ for the plant. They are a mineral and water acquisition organ only. The leaves are the primary photosynthetic organ of the plants. Okay, and we are going to use those terms. Okay, leaves are an organ in the same way that a liver is an organ. Plants obviously don't have livers, but okay, you guys get the idea here. All right, so the body of a vascular plant is essentially broken up into a few different parts. That's what this differentiated into means. Okay, there's a subterranean, that's underground, root system. Okay, there is a shoot system. All right, that's essentially your stem and support branches and things like that, and then your leaves, okay, that make your food. Now, those come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes and whatever. All right, if you're looking at some of the strategies that plants use to survive, okay, there's lots. Okay, some plants are like a strawberry. Okay, strawberries. Okay, they have their leaves. They're fairly close to the ground. Their leaves are fairly broad. Okay, but they have a very shallow root system. Okay, it's shallow and it doesn't go very far from the plant itself. If you've ever pulled up a strawberry plant, it's really easy. Okay, they come up easily because they don't have a very big root system. Now, if the original plant starts to get stressed for water and minerals, okay, that means that these roots are no longer able to get what the plant needs, it will put out a stolon, which is kind of like a tube, okay, that will grow away from this plant until it encounters some soil that's good. It's got water in it, it's got minerals in it, okay, and it'll plant itself there and it'll start growing roots. Okay, it'll use those parenchyma cells we talked about the other day, the stem cells that can become anything. It'll start growing a root system over there, it'll start growing its own leaves, and materials can be passed back and forth through the stolon. Okay, sugars and things like that can go from the bigger plant to the smaller one to support its growth, while water can go back over here to support the bigger plant. Okay, there's lots of plants that do that. Okay, raspberries also do that. If you have raspberries in your yard, you know that they start to come up everywhere. All right, like they're not just usually confined to the original place you planted them. They'll grow up in the middle of your lawn. Okay, they put out these little crawlers and they'll go everywhere. Strawberries will do that too. All right, everyone with me so far? Okay, other plants will grow sort of storage structures on their roots. Okay, this here is like the cassava plant. Okay, it has a water and starch storing organ underneath. Cassava's kind of like a potato, but not really. Okay, and you can kind of eat the roots. Doesn't taste very good, but you can eat them. All right, its upper part is more of a grass-like leaf, okay, so it's not a broad leaf, it's more of a narrow blade, okay, and essentially it has no stems. All right, grass's stem is very, very short. It's only that kind of white part at the base of the blade, okay, and this is very much like that. So lots of photosynthetic area, but not very tall. Okay, potatoes. Potatoes have another strategy, okay, they've got their leaf system. They've got pretty good shoots so they can spread out. They can get reasonably tall. Okay, but what do they use the potatoes for? Well, no, the roots are more the anchor. The potatoes aren't really an anchor. Why do we eat potatoes? What's in them? Starch. Okay, starch is plant fat. Okay, when we have extra energy, we store it as fat. Plants store it as starch. All right, and that's what potatoes are. Potatoes are energy storage structures. So as the potato plant grows throughout the year, it starts storing energy in its roots in the form of a tuber, okay, or a potato. The next year, if you want to plant potatoes, what do? Anyone ever planted potatoes before? Right. Essentially, you can just cut a potato in half, throw the two halves in the ground, and it'll grow. Right? You've all seen what happens to a potato if you leave it in the pantry, right? It starts to grow the legs. Okay? It gets the little eyes on it first, and then they start to grow legs. I once forgot about a bunch of them in my pantry, and they were way in the back, and then one day I started smelling something weird, okay? And I started cleaning stuff out of my pantry, and there were these like squishy black, looked like potatoes, but they had spider legs that were going all over the pantry, okay, like long purple, and they were like as thick as my pinky finger, okay, growing all throughout the back of the pantry. Okay, the energy to supply that growth isn't coming from photosynthesis because I left the doors closed on my pantry, which is why I didn't detect the smell until quite a while later. Okay, so the energy came from the potato. There's all kinds of starch in here. Okay, if you have fat stores, and we all do, okay, you can draw on those when you don't have enough food energy. All right, well, plants do the same thing. If they don't have sunlight, they draw on their energy stores of starch. All right, and that's what gets the potato plant started again. It grows out these little, sprouts or whatever. Okay, and you maybe have sometimes seen on those sprouts they grow little tiny leaves, little purple leaves. If those leaves get out into the sun, they'll turn green and they'll start carrying out photosynthesis, and that'll grow you a new potato plant, hopefully in the garden and not in the pantry. Okay, but they can do that. There's a lot of energy stored in potatoes. That's why potatoes are a high energy food item. All right, if you eat French fries, okay, is there a lot of calories in French fries? Yeah, huge, right? It's like one of the worst things you can eat if you're trying to lose weight or reduce your calories or whatever. French fries are like the worst thing you can eat because they're full of starch, which is full of energy, and they're cooked in fat. So they absorb all kinds of grease from the deep fryer, and so yeah, they've got tons and tons of food energy in them. Carrots are very similar. Yep, carrots are starchy as well, but there's a little bit more sugar in the carrot, which is why they're a little bit sweeter. Yes, well, not all vegetables. Vegetables are anything you eat the leaf or root of. Okay, so if you're eating lettuce, lettuce is a vegetable, but you're not eating the starchy part of it. Yeah. Um, to some extent, it could be protection, but I mean, mostly that's going to keep them from getting frozen, right? I mean, the top part is what gets frozen off in the winter. Okay, the potatoes themselves will probably freeze too because the ground will freeze deep enough, but mostly it's prevents evaporation, prevents them from being eaten, right? So yeah, for sure. It probably evolved to be underground for protection. All right, so that's an idea there for those. And then you got onions as well. Okay, now onions, obviously sweeter, okay, than potatoes because they're not storing as much starch, although there is some, but they're storing a lot of sugars, okay, in the kind of swollen base of the leaves. All right, so it's not the roots that you eat, even though the onion is often underground. That's not really the root. It's actually the base of the leaf. The roots are the little tiny, okay, things at the bottom of the onion, right? But it stores a lot of energy there. And you plant onions in a very similar way to planting potatoes. Now you can plant onions with a seed, but they take a lot longer to grow. If you plant them with the bulb, they grow a lot faster. Okay, and when you plant a bulb, you're essentially planting last year's onion. All right, and it'll grow because there's enough energy stored in that onion to get it started. Okay, everybody with me there? Okay. Now, adaptations. If you're going to live above ground, or if you're going to live out of the water, okay, like most vascular terrestrial plants do, okay, you've got to be able to meet some challenges or overcome some challenges. The first challenge is you're not surrounded by water. So you have to limit the amount of water that evaporates from your body. Okay? What's the main thing that does that for a vascular plant we talked about the other day? Okay, the stomata is one thing, okay, and that's the thing that opens and closes, okay, and the other thing, what's the entire plant covered with? Wax, right, the waxy cuticle, right? So we got, okay, the cuticle here, that's important, okay, it's not written on here, but cuticle is important, that's the waxy part, okay, and you got the stomates, right, those are two huge, okay, adaptations that vascular plants have to conserve water. So water is an important resource, but we also said light's an important resource. Now, believe it or not, plants are in competition with each other. All right, it's not a game. It's a competition for survival. How does a plant compete for light with other plants? It grows, exactly, it grows taller than the other plants. All right, if you look in the rainforest, okay, the tallest plants, the tallest trees, the canopy trees, they're the ones that get the best, most intense quality sunlight because they're up on top. Okay, everything else has to be shade tolerant because they only get whatever filters through. Okay, if you've ever walked in a real tropical rainforest, I mean, it's even on a sunny day, if you're walking on the forest floor, it's dark down there, right? Because there's a lot of layers of canopy above you that are filtering out the light. Okay, so if you want to get tall, you got to be able to support yourself. Now, cell walls and water vacuoles are fine as long as you're not too big. Okay, they'll only support so much. Okay, they're made of, like we talked about that, the cellulose fibers in the cell wall and the water vacuole, the turgor pressure that keeps the plant upright. Okay, and I showed you what that plant looked like when it was wilted. Okay, now it's watered and growing good again. But again, those plants are not going to get very tall, are they? Okay, in fact, they don't support their weight at all. As soon as they start to get long, they just fall. Okay, they don't really support themselves at all. Now, if we look over here, okay, on the other side of the room, okay, we do have some plants that grow tall and have to support themselves. All right, palm trees, okay, those are an example of those. Okay, this is a dragon palm, and it's got a very hard stem. What do we call a hard stem on a plant? a trunk. Yeah. Okay. Anything that can make a wood-like material, okay, is going to do a good job of supporting the weight that has to be up and in the air and in the sunshine. Okay, if you don't have this kind of woody material, then your plant stems are going to be weaker, and you can see that these plants here are a good example of that. Okay, these big kind of leafy ones, all right? They don't. Their stems are quite green. It's not very hard. In fact, most of them, as you can see, are tied to that broomstick that's in the center. Because if they're not tied to that, they just fall over, right? This one here is falling over, right? Can't support itself, and it's not really tied to anything. They don't have this material in the cell walls. They don't make the hard wood-like material. Okay, the stuff that helps make that wood-like material is this lignin. All right, what lignin does is it acts kind of like cement. And you would be kind of spreading it over the outside of the cell walls. It's part of the cell walls. It's a fiber, okay, but it can join several cells together and kind of cover up the gaps in between. And as a result, instead of being one cell trying to support itself, now 4 cells are supporting each other. All right, and that's a lot better. Right? Just imagine like how easy it is to break a single pencil. Right? You can snap it easily. But if you put 4 in a row and try and snap it, it's quite a bit harder, right? You got other things that are holding on to that and supporting it together. All right, so lignin is this important material that helps plants get tall and support all of this leafy weight, okay, that has to be up and in the sun. Okay, now there's other ways that plants compete with each other. Okay, they have forms of chemical warfare, believe it or not. Okay, if you ever look under a spruce tree, does much grow under there? Okay? Like there's usually a circle of dead underneath a spruce tree for 2 reasons. Not a lot of light gets down there, okay? But secondly, there's lots of needles on the ground from the tree. When those needles fall off the tree and they start to decompose, they release an acid that essentially poisons the soil for anything other than the tree. Okay? And that keeps other plants from growing around the roots of the tree and stealing its water. Okay? Everybody with me there? So the more a plant can grow upwards and outwards, the better it's going to be. And the better it competes because it shades out its competition. All right. Other ways to compete or other ways to adapt. Okay, you can see this is kind of a desert plant here. It would have a very, very thick cuticle and actually has a special structure, okay, that keeps essentially water inside. Okay, cacti kind of have the same idea. Okay, and we'll look at that in a little bit. All right, so adaptations of vascular plants. We've talked about this turgor pressure. Okay, turgor pressure is those water vacuoles, okay, and the water that's in them pushing from the inside of the cell against the cell wall, okay, and creating that internal support mechanism. All right, and I showed you the wilted plant the other day, but here's the the pictures of a plant that, as it gets more and more stressed for water, okay, starts to bend, okay, and wilt, all right, and look weak because eventually the water vacuoles get so emptied that the cell membrane actually pulls away from the cell wall, and when it does, it actually pulls the cell wall in, and that really kind of completes the process, okay, of tipping the plant over. Now, if I added water to that flower in the bottom picture, would it come back? Yep. Okay. If a plant's not dead until it's crunchy, right, then you're probably not going to rescue it. But if it's still like this, it's still a little bit green, you add some water to it, and it'll perk right back up. Okay, those water vacuoles will fill up, they'll push against the cell wall again, and it'll stand up. All right, so turgor pressure in combination with lignified cell walls holds up the really tall plants. Okay, the smaller plants don't have the lignin, they just rely on the turgor pressure. Okay, parts of the plant. Start at the bottom. Roots. Roots have 2 jobs. What are they? Right, it's an anchor. Yeah, anchors it to the ground. And collecting water and minerals. Okay, those are the 2 jobs of the roots. Okay, so they anchor the plant in the soil. They absorb minerals and water. Okay, they also have somewhat of a conductive function, but that's mostly where they join the stem, and the stem does most of the conducting. Now, there's also 2 kinds of roots. Okay, you've got this type of root known as a taproot. And you've got this type of root here that kind of spreads all over the place known as a fibrous root. Okay. Dandelions have a taproot. Canada thistle has a taproot. If you ever tried to yank those out of the ground and a big long thing comes out with it, okay, that's a taproot. Now, what type of root does a big tree usually have? Yeah, they're usually a fibrous root. Taproots are okay if you're going to be using them to store energy and you're not going to be very tall. Okay, but if you get really tall and you've got a taproot, you're going to have this problem. Here's the ground. Here's this tall tree. Okay, and if it's got a long taproot and it gets windy, what does the tree do? Starts to rock back and forth. Well, when the tree rocks back and forth, there's a pivot point right here. Okay, as the tree rocks back and forth, the root tries to move back and forth too, and eventually the tree would uproot itself. Okay, if it had a taproot. That's why big trees don't have taproots. Okay, they have fibrous root systems that spread out in all directions. Okay, and anchor with a much greater surface area, okay, making the plant able to withstand winds essentially from any direction, okay, and hold itself into the ground a lot better. Okay, grass also has a fibrous root system. Things that have fibrous root systems tend to be good at preventing soil erosion because they hold on to the soil and they keep it from blowing away or washing away. Right? You've probably seen, like, if someone's got grass in their front yard, you don't often see mud on their sidewalk. Whereas if there's a house being built there and there's no grass or anything, it's always muddy, right? Anytime it rains or anything, that soil just washes out onto the sidewalk and onto the street. Okay, and that's why usually in new areas they've got those funny foam things around the drains in the street. You ever seen those? It keeps all that dirt from getting in the sewer system. Right, until people get their lawn, and once people get their lawn, they usually take them away. Okay. Now, which one would be better in terms of getting water? Yeah, most of the time we would say fibers, but it actually depends on the situation. All right, these can go very deep. Okay, a taproot can go very, very deep. In fact, for like the mesquite bush that grows in the desert, these can be like 10 to 40 meters deep. Sometimes deep enough that they get into wells, okay, and they start actually drawing water out of wells. Other ones, okay, fibrous roots, they typically don't go very deep, but they tend to be very widespread. So it's a matter of what kind of situation are you in? Okay, if you've got a taproot, you know you're probably always going to be in contact with soil that's moist, even if it's way down. Okay, with a fibrous root, you know you've got access to lots of soil, but it's very shallow. So which one do you suppose a cactus would have? That's what most people would think. Oddly, they usually have a fibrous root system. Okay, the saguaro cactus, the one that's like on the Taco Time sign, okay, that one, they have a fibrous root system. They only go 5 to 6 inches into the ground, okay, but they can spread 50 meters in any direction away from the cactus itself. All right, now, usually the soil is dry, but in the desert, even if you had a taproot, the soil's probably dry even 8 or 10 meters below the ground. All right, so it wouldn't really matter. What the advantage of having a widespread root system is that when it does rain, you're right at the surface and you have a huge area from which to draw that water immediately. All right, since cacti can store water, that's the best strategy. Okay, everybody with me there? Okay, so they have their advantages, they have their disadvantages. You don't store a lot of energy in a fibrous root system, but a taproot can store energy. Okay, you can put lots of starch in here, like a carrot or a turnip or something like that. Okay, or a potato. Well, potatoes aren't really a taproot, but okay. Whereas in a fibrous root, not so much. Okay, other advantages of a fibrous root, you see these little nodules here that are on here? Okay, in lots of legumes, so like beans and peas and stuff like that, okay, they have these nodules, and in there are bacteria. And these bacteria can take nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into nitrate, which is what plants need for fertilizer. Okay, so these plants can actually kind of fertilize themselves, okay, with these bacteria. All right, and that's great if you're a gardener or a farmer or something like that. If you grow beans in one field one year, they'll actually replenish the nitrogen in the soil. When you harvest off the beans, you leave the roots, and in the roots is a whole bunch of nitrogen that these nodules have been building over the course of the year. And the next year you grow something else there, you don't have to fertilize it as much because you've got some natural fertilizer. Okay? I know when I plant my garden every year, I move the rows of beans. Okay? They're always in a different spot, so I'm always bringing natural nitrogen into the garden. I also put other forms of natural nitrogen in the garden, but okay, it stinks. I try and avoid using too much of that. Okay? All right, so there's the jobs of the roots: anchorage, support, and acquisition of water and minerals. Okay, stems. Stems also have a supportive job. Okay, they have to support the leafy structures above them that are carrying out photosynthesis, because the stems themselves, not big photosynthetic organs. Sure, they can carry out some photosynthesis, but not a lot. They're mostly about supporting the leafy parts of the plant and getting water up the plant and sugar down the plant. Okay, so they're like a highway, a freeway, like Highway 2, right? There's traffic going in both directions. Water's going up, sugar's coming down, okay, and it's also supporting the upper parts of the plant. Now, on the stem, there are going to be special structures, okay, called buds. All right? The purpose of a bud is it's got those parenchyma cells that we talked about before, those stem cells that can become whatever the plant needs. Okay? If the plant needs to grow new stems or new leaves, they can do that. Right? And this is really important for plants because they're often grazed on. Other things come along and eat them, and so they have to replace the parts of them that have been eaten. So in this example here, in this picture, they cut this part of the plant off. Right? A few weeks later, these buds here have grown into stem and leaf tissue to replace the part of the plant that was cut off. All right. If you have a hedge, you take advantage of this to make the hedge look good. Okay. If you have a hedge, you have to trim it all the time. How many people have a hedge? Not too many. They're not as popular as they used to be. But okay, you always have to trim a hedge. Have you ever seen like those mazes and stuff that they make out of hedges? Okay. The way they get them to look so thick is they're always trimming them. Okay? They're always cutting them back, forcing them to grow from further down. And that makes them appear a lot fuller because they grow only on the outside and not as much on the inside. Okay? And so they look a lot better that way, or a lot thicker. Okay? All right. Also, again, for the stem, big things here. Got to have lots of turgor pressure and lignin in the cell walls, okay? Because there's lots of support that has to happen there for the heaviest parts of the plant. All right, the leaves. Here's another version of that same diagram that you saw the other day. All right, we're not going to worry too much about the C4 diagram, okay? So you don't need to worry about that as much. Okay, we'll talk about it, but you're never going to be asked to label a C4 or a CAM plant, okay? C3 plants are the ones we're going to deal with the most, okay? Specialized cells. You got your palisade layer, okay? Palisade layer is where what happens? Lots of cells, tightly packed. This is the photosynthetic layer. Okay, palisade, photosynthetic layer. Underneath that, you see the cells are kind of oddly shaped and they make big gaps in between. Okay, that's the spongy layer. In the spongy layer is where water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen get exchanged for the photosynthetic cells. All right, stuff naturally moves through here by diffusion. Okay, if these cells are carrying out photosynthesis, they need carbon dioxide. Everybody with me there? Okay, and things naturally move by diffusion. So if there's a lack of CO2 here, it will naturally diffuse from the spongy layer into these cells. In the same way, these cells produce a lot of oxygen. Okay? If there's lots of it here, there'll be less of it here. Oxygen will naturally diffuse the other way and come out of the stomates. And then water vapor facilitates that process, okay, and it just evaporates out through the stomates. Okay, everybody with me there? All right, so you got your palisade layer, you got your spongy layer, and then you've got your epidermis. Okay, that's this layer of cells on the top and bottom. Their job, secrete that, the waxy cuticle. Okay, and then in most C3 plants, stomates are only found in the lower epidermis. Why would you only have stomates on the bottom side of a leaf? Couple of reasons. Exactly. If you have them on the top, they're always in the sun. They'll lose water a lot faster if they're on the top of the leaf. Okay, that's the main reason. The second reason is there's no room for the water to move here. Okay, it needs the spongy layer there with the spaces, the air spaces that are in there for water vapor, carbon dioxide, and oxygen to move effectively through. That wouldn't work nearly as well on top of tightly packed cells. So most of the stomates are on the bottom of the leaf. Okay, because it's again another way for the plant to conserve water. So 3 ways plant conserves water. Cuticle. Okay, stomates can open and close, and stomates are located on the bottom of the leaf. Okay, I've told you that I usually ask about how a plant conserves water, right? Right, so you might want to listen to that part again. All right, leaves consist of essentially, if we're looking at the leaf, so here's the leaf, and I don't draw leaves very well. Okay, that's a leaf. Okay, here's the blade. Okay, this is the stalk. And where the leaf comes off of the branch is the petiole. Okay, now with the cacti, okay, we said they gotta really do a better job of conserving water than other plants. Okay, you can see, first off, cacti don't have leaves. Okay, their leaves have modified to become thorns. Right, their photosynthesis occurs off the big part of the plant. So their structure is a lot different. You can see their stomates have 4 guard cells instead of 2. All right, so on a normal plant, you got 1 guard cell on either side of the stomate. In a cactus, there's 4. Okay, 2 on either side. That makes sure that that stomate is tightly closed when it's closed. Okay, the other thing is you see the palisade layer forms a ring instead of being packed against the surface. Right, that creates again a space, a fleshy space where water can be conserved. Okay, and these cells will still carry out a lot of photosynthesis. You see the spongy layer, okay, is in this sheath that goes around the tubes that carry water. All right, so you get this way better conservation of water. Okay, everybody follow me there? Now, if you're in the desert, people always get this idea that if I was in the desert dying of thirst, I'd just cut a hole in a cactus and drink out of it. Okay, when you cut a cactus, does water come pouring out? And people think it does. I don't know why, but that's what people think. They think water just comes out of it like a tap. Okay, you actually have to cut the fleshy part of the cactus out and suck on it. Okay, that's how you get the water. I mean, it is quite moist. There's a lot of moisture stored in there. The problem is it doesn't taste very good. Okay, most cacti are quite bitter for exactly that reason. They're trying to protect themselves from being eaten. They got the thorns. Thorns are a good deterrent. Okay, unless you're an antelope, you're probably not going to just chow down on a cactus. Okay, and secondly, they taste bad, and so most things won't eat them. Okay, but of course, if you're desperate, you can do it. All right, moving on here. Transport in plants. So how the plants move water through the stem. Okay, we're going to be looking at 2 different sets of tubes here. Okay, we got the tubes that transport water and the tubes that transport sugar. Right? They have to be separate sets of tubes because they're transporting material in different directions. You can't have the up tube transporting stuff down. Right? That's why you can't drive northbound on the southbound lanes of the Deerfoot. Well, you could, but you wouldn't last very long. Okay, you guys follow me there? You just can't have stuff going in 2 different directions in the same tube. Now, the key to this transport is that the tubes have to be very, very small. All right, this is an electron microscope picture of the inside of a tree. Okay, so this distance here is 100 micrometers, so about the size of your paramecium. Okay, that's how big these tubes are. Quite a bit smaller than that. Okay, if we take that up there, okay, whoa, that's not what I wanted. This one. Okay, if I take that up there, that 100 micrometers, okay, those tubes are what, 8 or 9 micrometers each. Okay, some of the bigger ones might be, okay, 15 or 20. They're very, very small. Okay, the reason is they're going to be utilizing the polar nature of water to draw water up the plant. Okay, hydrogen bonds are very weak. They can't support huge columns of water. Right? you've probably had this experience. If you use a straw, okay, if it's a long straw, you have to suck quite a bit harder than if it's a short straw, okay, or if it's a thin straw versus a very big Slurpee straw. Okay, if you ever get the big wide Slurpee straws, they work fine as long as you're drinking a Slurpee, but they don't work nearly as good when the Slurpee melts and it's liquid, because the column of water or fluid is too heavy now. There's too much of it in there, and you have to support all of this extra mass, whereas in a very small straw, the column of water doesn't weigh very much because there's not that much of it in there. All right? So the benefit of having smaller tubes is you can support the water in them without it falling out. Well, you probably wouldn't be able if you put a whole bunch of them together and try and suck on them all at the same time, you have the same problem. You're still trying to support a big column of water. It's not about the weight of the water. It's about your ability to create suction and pulling force. Okay, for us, the ability for us to create a low pressure area and have the water move that way, a siphon, that's what you essentially use when you're drinking something through a straw. Okay, we can't draw water more than maybe waist high. Okay, if you were to get a straw that would be that long, okay, it would have to be pretty thin for you to be effectively able to support the column of water within it. All right, everyone follow me there? Okay, if you had a thin straw, it'd be okay, but if you had a thick straw, you could have 30 or 40 milliliters of water in there. That's 30 or 40 grams. That's a lot to support, and we simply can't create that kind of suction. But a plant, a tree, has to be able to transport water 60 to 100 feet. Right, which is a long way. If those columns are small enough and they're separated, then it can work. All right, and so that's the reason why these cells or these tubes have to be so small. All right, now it's got another set of tubes for bringing down the sugar. They are also very small, okay, and they have plates in them that help to break up chunks of sugar. If the sugar starts to crystallize, it could block the tubes. So they have these plates in there that when a crystal starts to form, it lands on the plate, and then the weight of the sap above it breaks it. Okay, breaks up that crystal, and then it's able to get through the plate, and the sap can flow smoothly. Okay. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Yeah. Okay. So the way that this suction gets produced is through the evaporation of water. Right? When the water gets to the top of the leaf and it evaporates, you're not just pulling distilled water up the plant. There's stuff dissolved in that water. Agreed? Okay? Salts, minerals, things like that are dissolved in the water. When the water evaporates, the salts are left behind. So now you've got a high concentration of salt here in the leaf, and you've got all this water here. What does water do when there's an imbalance of salt? It goes to balance it. What's that process called? Osmosis. Okay? Osmosis is the pulling force that drives water up the plant. Okay? When this salt gets here, water naturally tries to move across the cell membranes to balance that salt concentration. Since water's a polar molecule, it's hydrogen bonded through cohesion to a whole bunch of other water molecules below it. So when one of them moves, the others move, and that's what pulls the rest up the plant. They also hydrogen bond to the inside of these xylem tubes, okay, through adhesion, right? And that can support the column of water, but only if the tubes are small. Okay? If the tubes are big, you've got all these water molecules in the middle that don't have anything to support them, and then you'll get them falling back down. Okay? Does that sort of make sense? That's what causes that pulling action up the tree, and that can move a lot of water. Okay? And it's free. The tree doesn't have to spend any energy for this to happen, because osmosis is a passive process. Right? So believe it or not, the tree expends no energy to transport water from the roots to the leaves. Okay? It simply relies on osmosis and the polar nature of water. Yep. Okay, so these numbers here refer back to this diagram. All right, so the numbers are on this diagram. If you have the notes package, you have the diagram. Okay, so number 1 is talking about water being absorbed, okay, by the roots. So roots absorb water and dissolved minerals from the soil. That is also an osmotic process. Okay, in number 2 is showing the roots burning the sugar that they have got from the leaves. Okay, so oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide gets released. Make no mistake, plants also produce carbon dioxide. Right? We get this idea that animals only produce carbon dioxide and plants only produce oxygen. But when plants burn their sugar, they also release carbon dioxide. They just tend to release more oxygen than carbon dioxide. Okay? So that process is happening all the time in the roots because sugar is being supplied to them. Okay, number 3 here. Number 3 is showing the movement of the water up the xylem. Okay, the xylem is the tubes that transport water. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, water and minerals are transported upward in the xylem, okay, from the roots into the shoot system. Okay, at the leaves, step 4, water evaporates. That evaporation causes that osmotic pulling force that's drawing the water up. Okay, creates a force within the leaves that pulls this upward. We'll write on here osmosis. Okay, osmosis is the thing that creates that pulling force. Okay, leaves exchange gases. So during photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is absorbed, oxygen is produced. Okay, so that's what's going on in number 5. In number 6, okay, number 6 is showing. Number 6 is showing the sap or the sugar being produced here. Okay, and number 7 is showing it traveling down the tree in what we call the phloem. All right, so there's 2 sets of tubes, the xylem and the phloem. The xylem transports the water, the phloem transports the sugar. Do you suppose that's something I would ask? Definitely. Okay, like maybe tomorrow on your quiz. Yeah. Well, xylem and phloem aren't hard to spell, right? I mean, it's one of the few words that starts with X. Remember that one if you're ever playing Scrabble. That's a great one for if you got an X. Okay, phloem. Okay, I mean, I would hope you wouldn't spell that with an F, but okay. All right, so transporting plants, we're going to look at where are these tubes. Well, the xylem tubes tend to actually be in the middle. Okay, they're actually dead phloem cells. Okay, the phloem is the new growth on the very outside. That's why when you scrape the outside of a tree, the thick sap comes out, not the runny, watery sap that's in the middle. Okay, when you nick the outside of a tree, you're getting the phloem sap that's full of sugar. Right? So when they're doing when they're getting maple syrup, okay, for out of a maple tree, okay, they actually tap just the very outside. The spike they put in doesn't go like deep into the tree. It only goes in a little ways, so it's always tapping the phloem and getting the sugary, sweet sap as opposed to the bland, watery stuff that goes up the tree. All right, so the phloem is on the outside, the xylem is on the inside. All right, that means there's a lot more xylem than there is phloem, which is good. All right, so look in here. Okay, your phloem has those sieve plates I was telling you about. These plates here. When a crystal of sugar gets onto those, the weight of the sap above will break it up and keep the crystals from getting too big. As those phloem tubes are replaced, okay, those sieve plates tend to break up and get kind of weak, and that's when they become xylem tubes and start acting the other way. Now, the reason that happens, plants grow from the outside. Okay, they don't grow from the inside. They add a layer on every year. Every season they add a layer on the outside. That's why, what do you see when you cut a tree down? You see rings, right? You see tree rings? Those tree rings mark where the phloem was each successive year because that's always the new tissue. All right, so it always grows by adding onto the outside. Because if it grew from the inside, it would always crack. Okay? If it was trying to always expand from the inside, it would always have to crack the outside to get bigger, right? And that's not what goes on. Phil? Yeah, there's a lot of xylem. Now, as the plant gets really, really thick, it tends that the inside just kind of rots. If you've ever cut down an old tree, the inside is usually rotted. So it's not all xylem on the inside, but a lot of it is. Okay. Okay, so xylem, like we said here, okay, xylem transports water up the plant. Got to remember that. Xylem is on the inside of the tree, and xylem uses the polar nature of water. Okay, cohesion and adhesion in order to support the column of water within it. Okay, so within the tube here, if each one of these blue dots represents a water molecule, okay, this particular blue dot has got a hydrogen bond against the inside of the xylem. It's got a hydrogen bond with this water molecule. These two have a hydrogen bond together, okay, and that's what's supporting them. They're getting pulled up together like a chain. Okay. All right, and this is also important to remember. As water All right, so let's have a look at these here. So number one, what processes, okay, or properties are used in both intracellular transport and transport in multicellular organisms? Well, we talked about today already. We know what process pulls the water up the plant. Osmosis, okay? Is osmosis used on a cellular level? Yes. Okay, so that's one of them. Okay, and on a multicellular organism, it's used to transport water over great distances. Okay, diffusion, that's still involved too. Otherwise, how would water, carbon dioxide, and an oxygen move throughout the leaf? Okay, they have to move to and from the palisade layer within the leaf, and that is entirely by diffusion. Okay. All right. Number two, if you're tapping a maple tree to harvest sap for syrup, which transporting tissue are you looking for? Xylem or phloem? The phloem, because the phloem is transporting sugar to the roots. You don't want to have watery sap, you want to have sugary sap for maple syrup. Okay, where is it located? Inside or outside of the trunk? Outside, yeah, it's on the very outside. Okay, in the leaf, why are so many cells packed together near the surface of the leaf? What's the advantage in the palisade layer there of having all those cells tightly packed? Seth? Right. The more cells you have on that top side of the leaf, the more photosynthesis you can carry out. Okay. How are they supplied with water? Well, the xylem brings it up, and it gets into that spongy layer and can move by diffusion into those cells as they need it. Okay, for number four, would a plant be able to transport water to its leaves more easily or less easily on a humid day? Less easily. On a humid day, there's already a lot of water vapor in the air, which means by diffusion it's harder to get the water vapor out of the plant and into the air, okay, because there's already lots of it there. All right. If the air is saturated, okay, 100% humidity, well then you're not moving very much water at all. Okay. Number five, you have a plant that does not look very full. That means it only has a few stringy branches. Okay. If you want it to have a more full appearance, what should you do? Trim it, yeah, cut it back, make it grow from further back, and it'll grow more leaves. Okay, very simple. All right, reminder, guys, your cell size activity is due tomorrow. Make sure you have it done. And uncheck that email me box so I don't get 30 emails tonight. Cell activity, the cubes.